Happy
I am
Pride.
Ryan to root for Claressa. I really am. I ain't gonna lie. I got a little bothered when her cousin did an interview. Now, yeah, I allowed the interview because I'm messy. I'm a messy bitch like that. You feel me? I can't help who I am. But I did feel just a little bit sorry for Claressa when her cousin Shalita came on my platform and literally, I said, what are people saying that you dragging her down?
What if the strongest person in the room was never being protected, only positioned? According to Tasha K, this story was never about gossip. It wasn't about screenshots dropped for shock value or timelines exposed for clicks. It was about patterns, quietly verified, cross-checked off camera, away from timelines, away from noise. And when those patterns finally aligned, they didn't point to chaos, they pointed to design. Publicly, Claressa Shields looked unshaken. Confidence, strength, loyalty on display. She posted belief the way champions do, without hesitation, without apology. But privately, the foundation was already cracking. Not from one rumor, not from one mistake, from overlap. From dates that didn't line up. From the same voice notes delivered to different inboxes. From the same excuses recycled with surgical precision. According to what was uncovered, this wasn't one secret, it was a system. 5 women. 5 lanes. One structure built to never collide, emotional support in one corner, quiet consistency in another, a past that never ended, a present that stayed undefined, and a future kept close enough to remain available. And in the center of it all stood visibility, the one role that made everything else look stable from the outside. The moment everything collapsed didn't happen online. There were no tears for the camera, no viral meltdown, it happened quietly. On Christmas, the day she believed was theirs had already been booked. While one story was being posted, another was being lived, one that placed Papoose with his family alongside Remy while loyalty was being defended elsewhere. And when silence followed, no denials, no breakdowns, Tasha K called it what it was, strategy. Because when receipts are real, silence isn't confusion, it's calculation. This isn't a story about a public breakdown. It's about a private reckoning, about the moment strength stops protecting the image and starts demanding the truth. And once a system is seen, it can never be unseen. To understand why this story hit differently, you have to separate scandal from structure. Scandals explode fast and burn out just as quickly. Structures, on the other hand, are built to last, quietly, efficiently, and often invisibly. According to Tasha K, what surfaced here wasn't a messy overlap of emotions. It was something far more deliberate. She didn't describe chaos, she described lanes. In her account, each woman existed inside a specific emotional function. Not accidentally, not impulsively, strategically. One provided emotional grounding, the person who listened, reassured, absorbed stress. Another existed off-camera, low-profile, protected from public scrutiny. There was a long-standing connection from the past that never fully closed, a familiar comfort that remained accessible. A newer involvement existed on the edge, recent, undefined, easy to discard if necessary. And finally, a future option lingered nearby, close enough to stay interested, distant enough to remain deniable. That's not infidelity in the traditional sense. That's management. What made the claims harder to dismiss wasn't the lack of flashy proof, it was the internal consistency. According to Tasha K, timelines didn't just overlap, they mirrored each other. Travel dates repeated with slight variations. Absences were explained with the same phrasing. Voice notes carried identical emotional beats, only addressed to different recipients. The excuses weren't creative, they were efficient: family obligations, work conflicts, scheduling issues. Each one plausible on its own. Together, they formed a pattern, and patterns don't lie easily. Publicly, Claressa Shields appeared solid. That mattered more than people realized. Her visibility wasn't a side effect, it was a stabilizer. When the most confident person in the room looks unbothered, everything else feels less urgent. Questions lose traction, doubts feel inappropriate. According to the narrative, her strength didn't just reassure her audience, it protected the system itself. There were warnings, Tasha K claimed, not dramatic confrontations. Quiet ones, subtle conversations, inconsistencies pointed out gently, but love has a way of reframing danger. Red flags become misunderstandings. Gaps become context. And when someone you trust offers reassurance that feels sincere, the mind often chooses comfort over clarity. This wasn't blindness, it was investment. The idea that loyalty was exclusive wasn't just believed, it was defended. And once a person publicly defends a narrative, walking it back becomes exponentially harder. Pride gets involved, identity gets involved. The cost of being wrong starts to feel heavier than the cost of staying uncertain. That's where cognitive dissonance lives. According to Tasha K., Claressa didn't see everything at once. No one does in situations like this. Pieces appeared in fragments, messages that felt off, timing that didn't fully make sense. Instead of confrontation, there was interpretation. Instead of accusation, there was internal negotiation. Maybe this doesn't apply to me. Maybe my role is different. Maybe what I'm seeing lacks context. That internal dialogue is where systems survive the longest, because systems don't rely on lies alone, they rely on hope. The turning point wasn't a public argument or a viral leak. It was Christmas, a date heavy with symbolism, a day that clarifies priorities without explanation. According to the account, Claressa spent that day alone. The reason she was given sounded reasonable: family commitments. But the truth, as it was later framed, landed differently. Papoose wasn't unavailable. He was present elsewhere with family alongside Remy. That distinction mattered. It wasn't just about where he was. It was about where she wasn't. Being told family comes first carries weight, until you realize you were never included in that definition. According to the narrative, that's when certainty cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The kind of realization that doesn't demand answers right away but never leaves once it arrives. From the outside, nothing changed. Posts continued. Supportive captions appeared. The image stayed intact, but behind the scenes something shifted. Emotional distance grew. Plans felt vague. Decisions happened without consultation. According to Tasha K., one side was still creating relationship content while the other was preparing flexibility. And flexibility is a currency of power. Silence followed the exposure. No detailed denials, no timeline corrections, no emotional appeals. To Tasha K., that silence wasn't avoidance, it was experience. When someone has navigated multiple narratives simultaneously, they understand the danger of saying too much. Words create angles. Angles create contradictions. Silence leaves nothing to dissect. That's when the conversation stopped being about if and started being about how long. How long had the system been running? How long had each lane been maintained without collision? According to the claims, overlaps weren't accidents, they were calculated risks. Travel schedules were staggered intentionally. Communication rhythms were adjusted carefully. The structure only worked as long as every woman believed her role was unique. Claressa's role, as framed, wasn't secrecy. It was visibility. Her confidence, her public presence, her unwavering defense of loyalty made everything look legitimate. As long as she appeared secure, questions elsewhere felt less credible. And that's the most uncomfortable part of the story. Not that she was deceived, but that her strength became a shield for something that wasn't designed to protect her. Tasha K. was clear about one thing. This wasn't about portraying Claressa as weak. It was about exposing a pattern where powerful men distribute emotional access across multiple women while presenting a controlled image to the public. The damage doesn't come from one lie, it comes from sustained ambiguity. And ambiguity is exhausting. By the time the allegations settled into public consciousness, nothing had been officially denied, nothing clarified. And in situations like this, silence starts to speak for itself, not as confirmation but as positioning. According to the narrative, the system didn't collapse, it compressed. Pressure increased quietly, waiting to see where fatigue would land, because systems like this don't rush endings. They wait. They rely on the assumption that attention will drift, that outrage will soften, that the person carrying the emotional weight will eventually choose the path of least resistance. Silence becomes pressure without fingerprints. And at the center of that pressure stood a single question, one no headline could answer and no outsider could decide. Once you see the structure clearly, do you walk away and rewrite your public identity? Or do you stay knowing exactly what you're standing inside? That's where the story stopped being entertainment and started becoming a decision. By the time the story reached this phase, it was no longer moving forward, it was tightening. That's how systems protect themselves, not through chaos but through compression. Fewer words, fewer reactions, fewer visible mistakes. According to Tasha K., this is the moment when attention slows on the surface and accelerates underneath. Publicly, nothing looked broken. Claressa's shield still appeared composed. No emotional posts, no public accusations, no messy back and forth. To an outside observer, that silence could easily be mistaken for stability. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means calculation. Sometimes it means survival. This is where the power dynamic quietly shifted. Once patterns become undeniable, the mind stops searching for explanations. The question changes from "is this true?" to "how long has this been true?" According to the narrative, this was the internal pivot point. The moment where context no longer comforted, where reinterpretation no longer worked, where denial stopped protecting and started exhausting. And exhaustion is dangerous, because it removes the emotional energy systems depend on. The story wasn't about 5 women anymore, it wasn't about Christmas, it wasn't even about loyalty, it became about image. About what happens when your public strength becomes a trap you didn't know you were setting. There's a cruel paradox in being visibly strong. People stop checking on you, they stop asking whether you're okay, they assume certainty. They assume control, and when you don't react immediately, they interpret silence as confirmation that nothing serious happened, that the situation was exaggerated, that the rumors didn't land. According to Tasha K, that assumption is often wrong. Silence doesn't always mean acceptance. Sometimes it means someone is measuring the cost of every possible move. Because once you've defended a narrative publicly, walking it back isn't just painful, it's humiliating. It forces you to replay every post, every caption, every moment you stood confidently beside something that was quietly undermining you. And humiliation keeps people silent longer than heartbreak ever could. While the public debated timelines and motives, the central figure at the heart of the story did something deliberate. Papoose didn't erupt. There were no emotional interviews, no detailed denials. No attempts to control the narrative aggressively, just enough presence to remind everyone he was aware, and just enough distance to avoid being pinned down. To Tasha K, that restraint wasn't fear, it was experience. When someone has managed multiple emotional lanes at once, they already understand the most dangerous thing they can do is talk too much. Words create evidence. Evidence invites scrutiny. Scrutiny exposes structure. Silence, on the other hand, leaves nothing to challenge directly. And as long as nothing is officially denied, the story stays suspended, never resolved, never closed. That suspension is where systems thrive. One detail kept resurfacing throughout the narrative: the divorce that wasn't moving. According to Tasha K, this wasn't about paperwork, it was about leverage. As long as nothing was finalized with Remy, power stayed exactly where it was. No clean exits meant no clean starts. No finality meant no accountability. Unresolved status isn't confusion, it's flexibility. It allows stories to shift. It allows promises to remain vague. It allows multiple futures to coexist without commitment. And in that uncertainty, emotional weight doesn't disappear, it concentrates. According to the account, Claressa was left holding that weight, balancing what she felt privately against what she had already defended publicly. Because once you become the visible symbol of stability, the system expects you to keep absorbing pressure quietly. Outward confidence doesn't stop internal pressure from building. It just delays when you allow it to show. Tasha K highlighted a pattern she says appears repeatedly in situations like this. The strongest woman in the room is often expected to endure the most damage silently. No one assumes she's confused. No one rushes to protect her certainty. They assume she's fine because she looks fine. But strength doesn't cancel realization, it just postpones the moment you acknowledge it. As time passed, the lack of response grew louder than any denial could have been. No evidence presented to counter the claims, no alternative timelines offered, no clarification about Christmas. According to Tasha K, this wasn't accidental. When receipts are real, silence becomes a weapon. Every word spoken can be replayed, dissected, contradicted. Silence leaves no fingerprints. That's when the story turned inward, not toward the women involved, not toward the rumors. Toward a single, brutal decision point. Walking away would mean more than ending a relationship. It would rewrite a public identity. It would require admitting that something defended with confidence was never what it appeared to be. Staying, on the other hand, would demand compartmentalization. Living with clarity you can't unsee, choosing quiet over confrontation, image over closure. Neither option offers peace, they just offer different kinds of loss. According to Tasha K, this wasn't about pushing Claressa toward confrontation. It wasn't about demanding statements or public explanations. It was about recognizing a reckoning. A moment where silence stops protecting and starts eroding trust permanently. Once the public understands the structure, they stop waiting for confirmation. They start watching behavior, and behavior can't be edited. Who shows up, who avoids clarity, who keeps options open instead of closing chapters. Those answers don't arrive through announcements, they arrive through patterns. By this stage, the word collapse took on its real meaning. Not tears, not headlines, not public embarrassment, the collapse of illusion. The illusion that visibility equals priority. The illusion that loyalty was exclusive. The illusion that silence meant safety. Because once a structure is visible, you can't stand inside it comfortably anymore. The most dangerous part of this story hadn't happened yet. Not because something louder was coming, but because the next move would be quiet. Decisions made privately always come before outcomes seen publicly. And when those decisions arrive, they don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves over time. This is where the narrative paused, not because it was finished, but because it was waiting. Waiting to see whether strength would continue to protect an image, or finally turn inward towards self-preservation. By the time everything slowed down publicly, the most important movement was happening where no one could see it. This is the phase people misunderstand the most. When there are no statements, no reactions, no emotional displays, the assumption is that nothing is happening. According to Tasha K, the opposite is usually true. Silence is not the absence of motion, it's pressure applied without sound. Once realization settles in, there's a moment that follows it, a quiet one. A moment where the mind stops negotiating. You're no longer searching for explanations. You're no longer replaying conversations hoping for a different interpretation. You're no longer asking, did I misunderstand this? You're asking something far heavier. How long have I been standing inside something that was never built for me? According to the narrative, this is where Claressa Shields found herself. Not confused, not emotional, just aware. Awareness doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives with weight. It makes every memory feel different, every defense replay itself, every warning you dismissed return with sharper edges. And that's the real collapse, not crying, not shouting, not public embarrassment. The collapse of certainty, the collapse of the version of reality you fought to protect. Tasha K was deliberate with her wording. She didn't describe this as heartbreak. She described it as recalibration, because heartbreak implies loss. This was something else. This was the realization that strength had been misused, not against her will but through assumption. She was strong, so she'd endure. She was confident, so she wouldn't question. She was public, so she'd protect the image. And for a long time, that worked for everyone except her. Silence in this phase becomes a weapon pointed inward. Not to punish, but to survive. When the world is watching, reacting too fast locks you into a narrative you may not fully understand yet. According to Tasha K, restraint wasn't weakness. It was assessment. Every option carried cost. Speaking out would trigger scrutiny, speculation, and backlash. Staying quiet would invite misinterpretation, doubt, and pressure. But silence also did something else. It forced the system to reveal itself without interference. Because when someone is used to controlling multiple narratives, they rely on reaction. They rely on emotion. They rely on distraction. Silence removes all of that. At the same time, silence applies pressure differently. The longer nothing is said, the more responsibility subtly shifts, not onto the person who created the confusion, but onto the person expected to respond to it gracefully. That's how power maintains itself, not through force but through expectation. According to Tasha K, this is where the system's final move begins, waiting it out. Systems like this don't rush endings. They compress time, they rely on fatigue. They assume public attention will drift, that outrage will soften, that the person carrying the emotional burden will eventually choose the path of least resistance, because resistance requires energy, and exhaustion makes compliance feel reasonable. Silence isn't neutral, it's pressure without fingerprints. Meanwhile, the public narrative began shifting. Without denial, speculation grew. Without clarity, assumptions hardened. And without visible emotion, people projected meaning onto absence. Some interpreted silence as control, others as acceptance, others as confirmation nothing serious had happened. But according to the story laid out, none of those interpretations captured what was actually happening. Because the real tension wasn't external, it was internal. There's a specific pain that comes with seeing clearly too late. It doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels humiliating. Clarity forces you to replay every time you defended someone who didn't deserve it. Every moment you explained away what your instinct flagged. Every instance where you became the shield for a narrative that was quietly harming you. That replay is relentless. And for someone whose identity is built on strength and discipline, that internal reckoning is especially brutal. Not because of what was done, but because of what was tolerated. Tasha K emphasized that this wasn't about turning Claressa into a victim. It was about showing how systems exploit resilience. The stronger someone appears, the more comfortable others become placing weight on them. And when that weight finally becomes unbearable, the collapse is silent, because the person collapsing has spent their entire life being praised for not collapsing at all. Silence from the other side continued. No explanations, no clarifications, no emotional appeals. According to Tasha K, this wasn't avoidance, it was patience. Because patience is powerful when you believe time is on your side. And time often is, especially when public attention is unpredictable. But patience has a limit. There comes a moment when silence stops protecting anyone, when it stops preserving options, when it stops maintaining flexibility. And instead it starts eroding trust permanently. That moment doesn't arrive with headlines. It arrives with a decision, and decisions are always made privately first. According to the narrative, Claressa stood at a psychological crossroads. One path required decisive distance, walking away, closing chapters, rewriting identity. The other required containment, staying, compartmentalizing, accepting clarity without confrontation. Neither path was clean. Neither path offered relief. Walking away would cost pride, staying would cost self-respect, and both would leave scars. The public often demands immediacy, statements, reactions, proof of emotion. But real reckoning doesn't follow social media timelines. It unfolds internally, slowly, and often invisibly. According to Tasha K, this phase was never meant to be entertaining. It was meant to be decisive. By this point, the story had stopped expanding and started narrowing. Fewer variables. Fewer unknowns. Just one central truth sitting in the middle of everything. Once you see the structure, you can't pretend you don't. And that awareness changes how you move, how you speak, how you stay silent. This is why the collapse wasn't loud. Loud collapses invite commentary. Quiet collapses force action. The most dangerous moment still hadn't happened, not because something bigger was coming, but because the next step would be irreversible. Once a decision is made, it can't be unseen, unheard, or undone. This was the calm before consequence. By the time the story reached this point, nothing else needed to be exposed. The system had already been seen. According to Tasha K, this is where most narratives quietly end. Not with confirmation, not with denial, but with a decision that happens far away from cameras. Because once clarity arrives, noise becomes unnecessary. The real question is no longer what happened, it's what happens next. For Claressa Shields, this moment wasn't about public reaction. It was about identity. Walking away wouldn't just mean leaving a relationship. It would mean dismantling a version of herself she had defended publicly, strong, confident, certain. It would require acknowledging that loyalty she stood behind wasn't exclusive, that visibility didn't equal priority, that silence had been mistaken for safety. That kind of admission costs pride, but staying costs something else entirely. Staying requires compartmentalization. It means learning to live beside information you can't unsee. It means accepting ambiguity as a permanent condition. It means choosing quiet endurance over clarity. And over time, that choice doesn't just drain emotional energy, it reshapes self-respect. Neither option offers relief, they just offer different scars. This is where legacy enters the conversation. Not legacy as a brand, but legacy as memory. Years from now, the details will blur, timelines will fade, but the decision will remain. Whether strength was used to preserve an image or to protect the self behind it. According to Tasha K, this is the part powerful systems fear the most. Not exposure. Exposure can be managed. What systems can't control is withdrawal. The moment someone stops participating quietly, the moment they choose distance instead of defense, that moment doesn't need an announcement, it shows up in behavior. Who is present, who stops explaining, who no longer absorbs pressure meant for someone else. Public silence continues to confuse people. Some interpret it as forgiveness, others as denial. But silence in this stage isn't about either, it's about timing. Because when a person reaches clarity, they don't rush conclusions. They let reality reveal itself fully. And reality always does. Papoose never had to say much. Silence kept options open. As long as nothing was finalized, with Remy Ma or anyone else, flexibility remained. But flexibility only benefits one side. The other side pays for it emotionally. That's the imbalance at the heart of this story. This was never about villains and victims. It was about access. About who carries the emotional cost when truth arrives late. About how strong women are often expected to endure quietly because they're capable of doing so. But endurance isn't the same as peace. Tasha K made it clear she wasn't demanding a public ending. She framed this as a reckoning. one that doesn't need validation from the internet. Because once the illusion collapses, the only audience that matters is the one living with the decision afterward. This story doesn't end with a breakup headline. It doesn't end with a statement. It ends with a choice. And whatever that choice is, it will shape everything that comes after. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because once a system is exposed, you can't stand inside it comfortably anymore. You either step away or you accept the cost of staying. By now, this story isn't really about what was said. It's about what wasn't denied. Because when allegations are false, people rush to correct them. Timelines get clarified. Stories get challenged. But when silence stretches on, it stops feeling like confusion and starts feeling like positioning. And positioning tells its own story. This was never about one lie. It was about a structure built on overlap, ambiguity, and emotional convenience. And once a structure like that cracks, it doesn't collapse loudly. It waits, it watches, it applies pressure where silence has worked before. So the real question isn't what happened. The real question is what you think this was. Was this a coincidence or a system? Was visibility the same as priority or just a useful shield? And when loyalty turns into multitasking with better timing, how long can silence really survive? Because strength doesn't mean you're immune to realization. It just means you carry it longer. And realization doesn't scream, it suffocates. Walking away costs pride, staying costs self-respect. Either choice leaves a scar, and that's why this story doesn't end with exposure. It ends with a decision, one that happens privately long before the public ever sees the result. Because once the image stops protecting you, the only thing left to protect is yourself. Now it's on you. Do you think silence here is strategy or avoidance? Do you think this system could exist without everyone playing their role? And if the receipts are real, what would you do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this before it disappears into the timeline. And remember, the real collapse never happens in public. It happens the moment someone decides whether to protect the image or finally protect themselves.